In video 7 of the 16th of April 2017, I'm going to read to you the story of fisherman number 14, who was the second plaintiff in the test case in the employment court. So fisherman number 14's provided an affidavit sworn on the 25th of March 2015. He was born in July 1982 and he was 32 years of age. He was married and he had a child aged 12. He lives and breathes in central Java in Indonesia. He graduated from high school in Indonesia, and after completing his schooling he went to work on a container ship in Indonesia and in Singapore until his wife had their first child. He then worked on the long-line fishing vessels for a South Korean company for 8 months. And then he worked on another one, the Glory, as a deckhand, and he worked as an oiler in the engine room. And in between those jobs he was unemployed for several months and unable to work locally. Then he got a third job with another South Korean company, a different one, the Oyang Corporation, to work on a ship called Oyang 70. His job was to be a deckhand and to work as an oiler. It was a 2-year contract for the period of 13 December 2007 to 15 December 2009. To work on Oyang 70, he had to be available to work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for the length of his employment contract, which was 2 years. And he says, the job on Oyang 70 was not a good job and the working conditions were terrible. I never want to work for this company again as it treated its crew very badly. If I had been informed about the true working conditions on the vessel, I would not have taken this job, especially if I had have known of the excessive working hours and the improper facilities. I was not paid according to New Zealand law for the work I did on Oyang 70. I was paid much less than New Zealand minimum wage rate for the hours I worked on Oyang 70, and I said to be paid according to New Zealand law for the work I did on Oyang 70. As exhibits, he attaches his copy of his seaman's book for the period of 13 December 2007 to the 5th of December 2009, which is the period he worked on Oyang 70, which is 4 pages. In relation to his story, he carries on. He applied for employment with Mrs. Nur at the NURINDO MANDIRO International Agency in Jakarta, who is the Indonesian manning agent for the Oyang Corporation. They assisted him to obtain the previous 2 positions, and she was the agent for the Oyang Corporation. And he was recruited to work on a 2-year contract with the Korean company on Oyang 70 in New Zealand waters. He signed a written employment agreement in Indonesia, the contract, which was for 2 years, and he completed the full contract. He was allowed to read and keep a copy of the contract. The contract did not specify the days and hours to work on Oyang 70. It only stated his job description and the position on the ship. The contract wage was to be $200 US per month, and the agent required that the first 3 months of his wages of US $600 would be kept by the agent to be paid at the end of his contract, and he was required to give a bank account detail to the agent, and he gave his parents' bank account details to the agent. He didn't get any pay slips. He got paid less than the amount the company said they would pay him under the contract. The agent took out some money for transfer fees and costs without telling him or seeking his approval, which made his pay much less than expected. Most of the contract was about the security they required and the penalties for breaching the contract. He was not told he could get legal advice on the contract before working on the vessel. At the very end of the contract, he flew back to New Zealand from Indonesia. The agent always met him at the Jakarta airport to pick him up. The first 3 months' wages, which was the $600, was given to him by the agent with some deductions after the end of the contract. You've got to remember this is much less than the New Zealand hourly wage. $200 a month for working so hard is not a New Zealand minimum wage. Anyway, carrying on with his affidavit. Security required. To get the job on Oyang 70, he had to pay a fee of Indonesian 3 million rupiahs, which was New Zealand $300 approximately, excluding the cost of the medical checkup, which was additional. He paid the money to the agent in Jakarta. He was also required to put up security of his parents' land certificate of their rice field to get the job as a guarantee that he would not breach the contract. If he was to breach the contract, he'd have to pay the cost of the airfares from Indonesia to New Zealand and would lose all his parents' land. The amount of money he was required to pay security to get this job, he said, was huge for an Indonesian person of his personal circumstances. When he arrived in New Zealand, he was not allowed to keep in his possession his passport or his seaman's book. They were kept by the captain. He says, quote, "Due to the security condition relating to the land certificate, I was afraid to quit the job before the contract ended, even though I was unfairly treated on Oyang 70. The living and working conditions on board Oyang 70 were uncomfortable, unsafe, and involved hard living and working conditions. The Korean superior officers were extremely disrespectful, which made life very difficult on board for me and the other non-Korean crew members." Omissions by the Oyang Corporation. At the beginning of his employment on Oyang 70, he was not given the New Zealand Department of Labour pamphlet, Important Information for Foreign Fishing Crews in New Zealand. His rights and obligations while working in New Zealand were not explained to him. He was never told, for example, that the Korean Seafarers minimum wage applied to his wages, which doesn't. It was the New Zealand minimum wage, but he wasn't even told about that. He was not aware that Southern Storm Fishing 2007 Limited were agents for the Oyang Corporation in New Zealand. And no one from the Oyang Corporation or Southern Storm Fishing 2007 Limited explained to him that the captain must investigate his employment complaints and that there was a dispute resolution process that the captain must follow. He was not told that he could complain to the New Zealand Department of Labour or to the New Zealand Police. This is his story about his working hours. The fixed working hours were not stated in the contract that I signed to work on Oyang 70. I had to be ready and available to work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on Oyang 70 for a 2-year contract for $200 US per month. If I knew that was the case, I would not have signed the contract and would not have agreed to work for this company. I feel that the Oyang Corporation misled me badly. I had no vacation days, no personal days, no sick days, no leisure time for relaxation activities or free time when I worked on Oyang 70. Any non-working time was for sleeping only. The ship's machinery often got major problems and would break down, which was a very serious problem. The generator also had big problems with the Bosch pump, and when that occurred, the net would not go out, so no catch could be obtained. This was a serious issue. Consequently, fast repairs were required. I could not get much rest, as some repairs took 24 hours or more than 24 hours to repair in total. There was no clear timesheets kept on Oyang 70 for the Indonesian crew and the other non-Korean nationals, such as the Filipinos working on the vessel. The higher-ranking officials, in this case the Korean engineers, kept their timesheets for formality. The Korean engineers where I worked kept strict regular working hours, whereas I had to work whenever they wanted me to. Sometimes I worked with only as much as 5 or 6 hours sleep in a 24-hour period. On average, I had to work 18 hours per day. This is his complaints. I frequently worked overtime because I was made to do jobs that should be done by an engineer, not an oiler. I did not get the proper overtime wages for the overtime work I was required to do on Oyang 70. I played a significant role in handling the engine on Oyang 70 every time the ship docked. I handled the main engine for the ship to go forward and backwards. This was a very important role that required high concentration to avoid an accident and to comply with health and safety requirements. However, I did not get proper rest time. I was supposed to get 6 hours of work time on and then 6 hours of rest time when docking, but instead at the most I got 3 hours rest time when docking. This was an unsafe work practice for such a demanding role. I did not get proper wages for that job, and I was not paid the New Zealand minimum wage. This was a very dangerous workplace, and the behaviour from the Korean supervisors and officers did not comply with health and safety requirements. This concerned me very much. I was very concerned about bad health and safety practices on Oyang 70. There was no one else to do this work that I was required to do on board Oyang 70, so I had to do it with very little sleep. I was so overworked. I always did what my superior told me to do, as there was no other choice. I was, as was the other Indonesian crew, essentially on call 24 hours a day to do the work when our superior officers told us to work. There was no free time or leisure time. Sleep time was when the Korean officers said, which was no set time and was always interrupted to do more work. Every time I worked alone on dismantling, cleaning and installing the turbo main engine, a job that was supposed to be done by engineers, I felt cheated and furious because I was not supposed to do this job. These are his complaints about the living conditions on Oyang 70. Consequently, due to the extensive working hours and sleep interruptions to go back to work, I did not sleep well. When I did get to have a sleep, the bedroom was above the freezer room. Cold air often went into the room and made sleeping difficult. I always felt exhausted. It was a terrible situation. I observed that the other Indonesian crew on Oyang 70 always looked exhausted as well. Complaints about exploitation on Oyang 70. I became depressed and broken-hearted as the contract continued for 2 years, as I could not get support or improvement of my working conditions. I was at work basically 24 hours, 7 days when on the vessel. In 2 years, I only left the vessel twice when in the port in New Zealand. This was not normal working conditions. This was very wrong. The company was basically exploiting me and the other Indonesian crew. The Oyang Corporation was able to exploit me because they had my parents' land certificate. This was very cruel and unfair and behaviour that should not be allowed. The terribly, pitifully low wages was also very depressing, as there was very little amount of money to take home for such hard work performed over 2 years that could barely cover my family's needs. Complaints to the captain being ignored on Oyang 70. I made complaints when I worked on Oyang 70 to the captain directly, and he completely ignored me. I made complaints to the captain about the following matters: A. Health and safety concerns. B. Working conditions. C. Unpaid wages. D. Failure to replace damaged work protective clothing. E. Living conditions. F. Hygiene conditions. G. Long working hours. H. Fatiguing working conditions. I. The terrible mattress I had to use, which was old and thin. J. The dirty bedding I was provided with, which was always wet as the freezer was right under my mattress. K. Gas poisons affecting my health and eyesight due to the chief Korean engineer not following the prescribed safety procedures. And I complained about the injustice and always having to do other workers' jobs on Oyang 70. My complaints and concerns were always ignored. The chief of every division in the boat, including the chief engineer, told me and the crew we were not to complain to an observer from New Zealand when they visit Oyang 70 to do inspections. We were not allowed to ask New Zealand Observer Supervisor to help us workers or to make complaints. Any complaints to them about food, clothing issues, hygiene concerns, or about needing fresh water to drink and bathe in, or about any other matters concerning Oyang 70. Every worker, including me, was threatened by the higher-ranking Korean officers on Oyang 70 that we would be sent home if we disclosed the facts about improper foods, improper work clothes, having to bathe in seawater, unwashed blankets, dysfunctional room heater and water heater, etc. to the New Zealand Observer or to anybody else. The threat was that if I or any of the other Indonesian crew members complained to the New Zealand Observer, that we would be sent home and lose our security if we complained to the Observer and asked them to help. I could not risk losing my parents' land, so I could not get help. It was a terrible situation to be in. I was basically trapped in my job at sea on this vessel, and I was powerless to effect any improvements to the situation. Complaints about abusive behaviour towards the Indonesian crew on Oyang 70. I was frequently verbally abused every day, as were my Indonesian crew colleagues on Oyang 70 by the superior Korean officers. I regularly saw Korean crew officers sexually abusing most of the Indonesian crew deckhands. This was terrible to witness, and I was powerless to help my colleagues. I often saw an Indonesian officer indecently assault Indonesian crew in the hallway outside by grabbing their genital parts and sexually touching them against their will on Oyang 70. I felt very disgusted about the sexual abuse of the Indonesian crew on Oyang 70. This is a great abuse of power over vulnerable Indonesian crew who were afraid to leave the vessel because they would lose their security if they breached their contracts by leaving. It was not possible to complain as the sexual abuse problem as related to the people in authority who were doing it, and it was a widespread problem on Oyang 70. Complaints about insufficient medical attention on Oyang 70. There was insufficient medical attention on Oyang 70. It was difficult to get medical attention when it was needed. This was very unsatisfactory and made it an unsafe workplace and endangered my eyes. For example, I got sore eyes from leaking ammonia gases and needed eye drops. I needed to ask for medical attention several times to get it. I really needed the eye drops because of the problem with the ammonia gases. When I hurt my leg from work, it made it hard for me to walk. However, I was forced to keep working. My life was put in danger by my job because I had additional duty to manage changing 6 cylinder heads and 6 pistons, in which, if the pulley rope was cut, it could severely hurt me or take my life. I did not receive any additional wages for these extra work duties. Every day I had to open and close the top of the ammonium compressors without safety tools because I was not given them by the chief engineer. Every time when I tried to open the top of the ammonium compressor, the ammonium compressors leaked because of packing failure, and it often made me suffer sore eyes and headaches. However, I never got medical treatment for the side effects of a dangerous job. The supervisor did not supervise properly. The supervisor did not care if we had breathing problems from the ammonia. I told my high-ranking supervisor about my health problems, but no response was given. Therefore, I never got medical treatments to treat these health problems. Outstanding wages. I was not told that the New Zealand Minimum Wages Act 1983 applied to my wages. I was not told that I could be paid or would be paid for the New Zealand minimum wage for the hours I worked. I now know that the New Zealand minimum wages apply, and that I was paid less than I should have been, and was significantly paid under the New Zealand minimum wage. Under New Zealand law, the Minimum Wage Act applies, and I seek to be paid according to the New Zealand law. I want to get paid my outstanding wages and any other money due to me. I just wanted a job to be able to earn a living to support my family. I worked very hard. I deserved to be treated respectfully and with dignity, and to be paid proper wages and to live in decent conditions with reasonable working hours. The health and safety conditions were appalling on Oyang 70. I was lucky my contract ended and I could go home, as I could be dead now if I stayed much longer on Oyang 70. As my friends on the vessel, TAIPUR and SAMSURI, another one RAIS, and TAIMIDI all died. They all drowned when Oyang 70 sank. The bodies of Raz and Tamadi were not found. Tamadi and Raz were oilers like me on Oyang 70 doing the same job. They died when the vessel sank in New Zealand. I would like an apology from the Oyang Corporation for bad treatment. I have to fight in court in a foreign country in New Zealand for justice, and it's hard to pay for that. Accordingly, I'd like the court to ensure that my legal costs get paid, by the court or by the sale of Oyang Corporation for whatever this court case cost, including all the airfares and disbursements included by my lawyer on my behalf, because the whole situation on Oyang 70 was unfair and needs to be put right by the court. I would like to receive appropriate compensation and damages for the improper wages and living and working conditions I had to endure. Sworn in Tegel, Central Java, by Fisherman number 15, who was the second plaintiff in this test case. That's his story, and he's really been emotionally damaged by what's happened to him, and it's really not on, and he seeks justice.